You say that all men had been created equal and endowed with an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm glad you corrected them. It's not unalienable. You're right, Tom. It's inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were not remotely self-evident truths. That most Americans believed they were owed less to philosophy than to the Bible, to the assurance given equally to Christians and Jews, to Protestants and Catholics, to Calvinists and Quakers, that every human being was created in God's image. The truest and ultimate seedbed of the American Republic, no matter what some of those who had composed its founding documents might have cared to think, was the book of Genesis. And to that I ask, really, what about the Stoics? What about deists who were sort of founders of the American Republic who would not perhaps would claim not to be going back to Genesis, but would be drawing on more sort of classical sources for their belief in human rights and equality? What would you say to that?
They're wrong. I mean, there was no concept of human rights in Greece or Rome.
But it's the birthplace of democracy, Tom.
Right. So this is a kind of perfect illustration of the way in which, when we look back at the classical world, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to write Dominion, what you look at is viewed through a kind of smokescreen. And the particles that constitute that smokescreen are Christian. So it's incredibly difficult to kind of brush away that smokescreen, often because we don't even realise that the smokescreen is there. You don't even realise that what you're seeing is something that's kind of distorted. So democracy, clearly it's a Greek word, power of the demos, which we might translate as the people. And so we're tempted to think that something called democracy is there in ancient Greece that our modern democracies then pick up. And our idea of democracy, which is expressed, even though the founding fathers, of course, are founding a republic rather than specifically a democracy, but when they assume that there are things called rights and that everyone shares in them. And they're saying this even though notoriously women don't have the vote and black people are allowed to remain slaves under this constitution. And this is something that, and this is a kind of great source of tension and stress that ultimately will lead to the American Republic tearing itself apart and collapsing into civil war. And it takes a very, very long time for these ideals, these democratic ideals, to be fulfilled. Many would argue that they still haven't been fulfilled properly to this day. But the idea that a democracy is an expression of a kind of ideological notion of the rights of each individual is very, very deeply rooted. And so when we look back at ancient Athens, the criticism, it's the point that is almost invariably made is, well, it was a democracy for the Athenian men. Women didn't have the vote. There were slaves, metics, foreigners didn't have the vote, which is entirely to see it through Christian glasses, Christian lenses, because that is not what democracy was to the Athenians. The Athenians were not saying that this is that our way of government is an ideological one, rooted in abstract values, abstract notions of rights, of individual rights. What the power of the demos expressed was a highly complex, subtle, emotionally grounded sense the Athenians had that they were bred of the soil, that they were autochthonous in the Greek word, that they were literally creatures who had emerged from the earth of Attica, and that they'd done this as favourites of the gods and specifically of Athena, and that therefore the demos, the body of the Athenian people, should have power because that was what the gods, and Athena specifically, had willed. And that in this kind of nexus of the divine, the earth, and the human, everyone who was bred of this soil, everyone who was a true-born Athenian, had duties to the soil and to the gods that they had emerged from. So men it was their responsibility